When I lost my job, my father didn't console me. Instead, he sneered, his lips curling as if the word useless had been rehearsed on his tongue for years, waiting for this very moment. He told me he'd always known I would fail, that I was never meant for the real world. I sat there quietly, allowing him to believe his version of the story. He thought this was the day I'd finally crumble, the moment I would vanish quietly while he handed everything over to my brother. What he never realized was that months earlier, I had sold a patent under my maiden name. $99 million sat safely in a trust, out of his reach, beyond anyone's grasp but mine. So when he pushed me aside to make room for his golden son, I agreed. I even smiled. I walked away because deep down I knew a day would come when the truth would surface, and when it did, his smug grin would shatter. That day arrived on an ordinary Tuesday, the kind of day that begins like any other and ends with your world completely changed. My manager had summoned me into his office, his expression already betraying the news before his words did. Downsizing. Restructuring. My position was being eliminated. I had been with the company for almost 10 years, leading projects that brought in millions, holding patents, earning the respect of my team. None of it mattered. By 3:20 that afternoon, I was officially unemployed. I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. I rehearsed in my head what I might say to my father. Maybe he would at least pretend to care. But the moment I stepped through the door, his reaction was immediate. "There she is," Dad said, voice dripping with mock sympathy. 9 years gone, and what do you have to show for it? Nothing. I told you this would happen. You were never cut out for real responsibility. Across the table, my brother Mark smirked into his glass. He didn't need to speak. Dad always did his bidding for him. The weight of their judgment pressed down on me, the same weight I'd carried since childhood. Every achievement I'd ever earned had been brushed aside. Luck, temporary, nothing worth pride. I sat in silence as dinner unfolded. Dad raised his voice louder than usual, making sure my aunts, uncles, and cousins heard every barb. "Some people," he said, fork in hand as if delivering sage advice, "just aren't built to handle pressure. They're better suited for smaller tasks, things that don't require real backbone." Laughter broke around the table. Mark basked in it. I kept my face composed, my hands calm in my lap. But beneath the table I angled my phone just enough to glimpse the banking app. The number glowed back at me, unwavering. 99,248,563. Proof that I wasn't powerless. Proof that his words no longer defined me. Sliding the phone back into my pocket, I raised my eyes to meet his. He thought this was his victory lap, that he had finally broken me. What he didn't understand was that every insult, every smirk, every laugh only hardened my resolve. Later, as the dishes were cleared and the conversations faded, I made a decision. I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't plead for approval. I would let him believe his version of events for now. Because when the truth surfaced, it wouldn't just prove him wrong. It would crush him. The days that followed were heavy, not because I doubted myself, but because the cycle was so familiar. My father had always treated me this way. Every success of mine dismissed, every mistake magnified. When I won a science fair at 16, he shrugged. "Anyone can memorize facts, Anna. That doesn't make you brilliant." When I graduated top of my class, he muttered, "Grades don't mean a thing in the real world." Mark, meanwhile, could do no wrong. If he closed even the smallest deal, Dad paraded it as if it were a Nobel Prize. If he stumbled, Dad excused it as part of learning. I wasn't jealous anymore. I was exhausted. Exhausted from being the daughter who could cure cancer and still be told I hadn't done enough. One evening, Dad gathered relatives and business associates in our home. He poured drinks and lifted his glass. "Mark," he declared proudly, "is the future of this family. Strong, decisive, a true leader." Then his gaze slid to me, sharp as a blade. "And Anna? Well, she'll figure out where she belongs. Something smaller, less demanding." The room filled with polite laughter. Mark smirked as if a crown had just been placed on his head. My stomach twisted, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I smiled faintly, the kind of smile that says, "You have no idea what's coming." That night, lying awake, staring at the ceiling, I realized something crucial. For years, I had tried to earn his respect, chasing even the smallest sliver of approval. But now I understood I didn't need it. Respect that comes through humiliation isn't respect at all. I thought back to the patent, the long nights, endless sketches, failed prototypes, and then the moment of breakthrough. I remembered Walter, my mentor, warning me, "This invention will change your life, Anna. Don't ever let anyone steal it from you." And I hadn't. The patent was sold. The money was real. 99 million sat quietly in my trust. Dad had no idea. At dinner, when he delivered his little speeches, he believed he was shaping my destiny, pushing me into some corner where I would remain small. What he didn't know was that I was already planning my exit. Not a retreat, but a precise, devastating strike. Let him boast. Let him humiliate me. Let him spin the story he adored. The higher he lifted Mark onto that pedestal, the harder they both would fall when reality surfaced. It didn't take long for Dad to move his pieces. Just weeks after I lost my job, he began reorganizing, as if my absence from the professional world had left an opening he'd been waiting for. One morning he summoned me into his study. The heavy oak desk between us felt more like a barricade than furniture. Neat stacks of papers lay in front of him, and Mark lounged in the corner, pretending indifference but glowing with smug satisfaction. Dad folded his hands. "Anna," he began, voice practiced. "It's time we clarify your role in the family business. You've had some setbacks. Nothing personal, but this company requires stability, leadership, and Mark," he gestured proudly, "is ready to step up. I'm transferring a majority of the decision-making authority to him." I nodded slowly, though my chest clenched. "And what about me?" "You'll remain part of the family, of course," he said, as though that were consolation. "We've arranged a modest settlement, a stipend to help you get back on your feet, maybe start something of your own. But from here on, the business will be in stronger hands." Stronger hands. The phrase hit like a slap. Mark leaned forward, unable to resist twisting the knife. "Don't take it personally, Anna. Some people just aren't built for this kind of responsibility." I wanted to laugh. Sharp, bitter, uncontrolled. Instead, I remained composed. "So all those years I worked alongside you both. Those late nights, the contracts I brokered, all of it suddenly counted for nothing." Dad's expression hardened into stone. "You should be grateful, Anna," he said. "Not everyone gets a second chance. I'm giving you freedom from the stress you clearly weren't capable of handling." Freedom. That was his word for erasure. The lawyer stepped forward, sliding a neat stack of documents across the polished desk. He called it a fair settlement. No company shares, no dividends, no slice of real control. Just a tidy allowance meant to keep me comfortable but never powerful. I stared at the papers in silence for a long moment. Then, without a single word, I lifted the pen and signed. The lawyer's eyes flickered, betraying surprise, maybe even relief. Dad exhaled like a man convinced he had finally won. Mark sat smirking, carrying himself like the heir he always imagined he was. None of them noticed how steady my hand was. How my smile never faltered. I wasn't surrendering. I was letting them believe they had stripped me out of the picture, all while I kept hold of the one piece they could never touch. Later that night, I remembered something my mother once told me before she passed away. "Don't take the shovel from someone digging their own grave. Just make sure you're not standing in the hole with them." As I tucked the signed papers into my bag, I realized I had never understood her words so clearly. Long before that meeting in my father's study, I had already built my lifeline. It began in a cramped little lab on the outskirts of Raleigh. The walls smelled faintly of solder and machine oil, shelves sagged under boxes of parts and stacks of notebooks crammed with equations. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Every wire, every diagram, every sleepless night belonged to me. I remember one evening especially well. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I hunched over my workbench, coaxing the last component into place on a prototype no bigger than a paperback. My fingers ached, my hair was pulled into a messy knot, and graphite stained my palms. When the final piece clicked, I held my breath and flipped the switch. The device hummed alive. Not flawless, but working. Entirely mine. That was the moment Walter walked in. He was 62, semi-retired, the sort of man who would rather rebuild a toaster than buy a new one. He set down 2 cups of coffee, glanced at my face, and chuckled. "You look like you fought a war," he said. "Feels like it," I admitted. "But it works, Walter. Actually works." He turned the device in his hands, studying it with the reverence of someone holding treasure. Finally he said, "Anna, this isn't just an invention. This is freedom. Don't let anyone, least of all your father, take it from you." I knew he was right. That's why weeks earlier I had already hired Linda, a sharp-eyed patent attorney who wasted no breath. We met in her downtown office, Papers spread across a sleek mahogany desk. File it under your maiden name, she advised. Use your lab address. No trail leads back to him. Every move was intentional. Every signature another layer of armor. Then came the phone call I'll never forget. Linda's voice was calm, but I could hear the smile behind it. The patents approved, Anna, and the sale closed this morning. A medical tech firm out of Chicago. Total value, $99 million. The room spun around me. I gripped the edge of the workbench, whispering the number like it might vanish if spoken too loud. $99 million. Already sealed in a trust. Already untouchable. Walter clapped a hand on my shoulder. You've just built yourself a lifeboat in a hurricane. Now don't breathe a word. Some storms are best watched from the eye. I nodded, though some part of me longed to shout my triumph to the world. Instead, I slid the papers into a fireproof folder, locked them in the bottom drawer of my cabinet, and pocketed the key. That night, as I drove home with the documents beside me on the passenger seat, the streetlights streaked golden lines across the envelope. I understood something then. No matter what storm my father tried to conjure, I wasn't trapped inside it anymore. I was already standing above the flood. The night of my father's grand dinner felt more like a coronation than a family gathering. The long dining table glittered with polished silver and crystal glassware, candles flickering against tall windows. My father moved through the room like a monarch, shaking hands, pouring wine, ensuring every guest knew this was his kingdom and Mark was his chosen heir. I slipped quietly into a chair at the far end, unnoticed, exactly how I preferred it. Dad tapped his glass, commanding attention. Tonight, he announced, voice booming with pride, I want to honor a man who embodies strength, resilience, and vision. My son Mark. Applause rolled through the room. Mark stood grinning, feigning humility, though the smug glint in his eyes betrayed him. Dad continued, Mark is the future of this family's business. He has what it takes to carry us forward. Then his gaze cut toward me, sharp as shattered glass. Nana. He paused for effect. Well, she's still finding her path. Some people simply aren't built for the strain of leadership. It's not weakness, it's just the truth. Polite laughter scattered across the table, each chuckle stinging in its own way. My aunt leaned close, whispering something meant as comfort. Don't worry, dear. You'll find your place. Maybe teaching or something gentler. I forced a smile. Every word felt like a pebble striking glass. Harmless alone, but together enough to fracture the surface. What no one understood was that I had already lined myself with steel long before this night. Dinner arrived. Roasted lamb, garlic potatoes, wine flowing freely. Dad launched into story after story of Mark's so-called accomplishments. Deals closed, meetings led, opportunities seized. Each tale grew grander, each applause louder. Mark drank it in, soaking up the role of rightful heir. I excused myself quietly, slipping into the hallway. In my bag lay a neat envelope. Documents, bank statements, contracts, all proof of what I had built tucked in plain sight. My fingers brushed the packet, reassured by its weight. When I returned, Dad raised his glass again. To Mark he declared, voice swelling with triumph. And to family, the strong ones who carry the rest. His eyes slid toward me, daring me to object. But I didn't. I lifted my own glass, voice calm, smile steady. To family, I echoed. Because I had already decided they could have this night, their charade of superiority. I wouldn't fight it. I wouldn't explain. I would let the curtain drop exactly as they expected. And when the truth came out, it wouldn't just dull their celebration. It would extinguish it completely. It didn't take long for the cracks to appear. Success always made my father reckless, and with Mark basking in his approval, recklessness slid into excess. New cars appeared in the driveway, each more extravagant than the last. Weekend trips to Aspen. Designer suits, lavish dinners, all billed to accounts they assumed were theirs alone to drain. But they had forgotten one crucial fact. Many of those accounts still carried my name as guarantor. Invisible in the fine print, but binding nonetheless. I first learned of it from Caroline, an old acquaintance who thrived on gossip. We bumped into each other at the market between stacks of apples and oranges. I saw your brother at the dealership last week, she said casually. Mentioned he was using the family credit line. Surprised you're still letting them after everything. I kept my face neutral. Oh, I thought those were closed. She shrugged, uninterested, and wandered toward the bakery. But I stood frozen for a moment, my heart steady, my mind already calculating. those accounts were still active, every dollar they spent was technically tied to me. Which also meant I had the power to end it. That night, I pulled the old files from a drawer, flipping page after page until I found them. 3 active accounts, each carrying balances that tightened my chest, not with fear but with the sheer audacity of their indulgence. Trips, diamonds, designer resorts. It was all spelled out in the statements as clearly as ink on glass. By the next morning, I was dialing Scott, my financial advisor. His steady, measured tone calmed me as it always did. "You want to act on this?" he asked after I laid out the situation. "Yes," I said firmly. "Freeze the accounts. Demand repayment. Today." He paused, then let out a long, low whistle. "That's going to sting, Anna. Your father won't take it quietly." "I don't want him to," I answered without hesitation. By midday I was sitting across from him in his downtown office, the noise of the city faint through the glass walls. He spread the paperwork in neat stacks across the desk, pen balanced between his fingers. "Once you sign," he explained, "the banks are required to move. The lines will be closed, balances due immediately. No extensions, no more charges." I picked up the pen and signed cleanly, decisively. Each stroke felt like slamming a door my father believed would always be open to him. Walking back through the city that afternoon, the air seemed charged, sharper than usual. Before I reached the corner, my phone buzzed in my bag. His name lit the screen. I let it ring out. Seconds later, a text appeared, words jagged, furious. "What the hell have you done?" I slipped the phone away, the corner of my mouth curling upward. He had felt the blow immediately. The safety net was gone, the trap sprung. And this was only the first move. The summons came a week later. My father's voice on the phone, brittle, clipped, carrying the tremor of a man realizing something had slipped beyond his grasp. His office was staged like a tribunal when I arrived. He sat rigid at the head of the mahogany table, jaw set, arms crossed. Mark slouched beside him, feigning ease, though the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. 2 longtime business associates filled the remaining seats, their faces unreadable, curious. "Anna," my father began, tone heavy with controlled rage, "perhaps you'd like to explain why those accounts are locked. Why my son and I were treated like penniless fools in front of a banker." I sat opposite, hands folded calmly. "The accounts bear my name," I said evenly. "I exercised my right to protect myself." Mark slammed his palm against the table. "You're choking us financially. Do you have any idea the damage you've caused?" I met his glare without flinching. "More than the damage you racked up in your little spending binges." "Don't insult me, Mark, I've seen the numbers." The room stilled. My father leaned forward, eyes hard and sharp. "This is childish. Petty. I gave you a settlement, Anna. I gave you freedom. And this is how you repay me? By trying to cripple us." A thin smile touched my lips. "You call it sabotage. I call it accountability." His fist slammed onto the table, rattling the glasses. The 2 associates exchanged knowing looks, as if the spectacle were more entertaining than concerning. My father drew a breath, voice low and cutting. "Enough games. Sign over what remains of your share and we'll move past this. Otherwise," he let the word hang like a blade above my head, "you'll regret it." I let the silence stretch, their arrogance thickening the air. Then I reached slowly into my bag, fingers brushing the envelope I'd been carrying like a secret weapon. I set it down on the table, not loudly but with deliberate weight. Mark scoffed. "What's that supposed to be?" I tapped it once with my fingertip. "Proof. Proof that makes all of this," I gestured around the room, "look like pocket change." My father's brow furrowed as he pulled it open. His eyes flickered across the notarized documents. Dates, signatures, wire transfers. His expression shifted. Confusion first, disbelief next, then the one thing I had spent my life waiting to see in him. Fear. "It's impossible," he muttered. "It's real," I replied. "A patent I filed before you tried to cut me out. Sold last year to a medical tech company in Chicago. $99 million. Already locked in a trust." Mark's jaw dropped. 99? No way. "Check the signatures," I said coolly. "Every page carries my name alone." One associate leaned over, scanning the records, and gave a low whistle. The other lifted his brows, visibly impressed. The air in the room shifted. My father's trademark smirk, the one he wore every time he called me weak, the one that mocked me for daring to prove myself, shattered. His hands trembled faintly as he lowered the documents. "You," he started, but no words followed. I leaned forward, my voice cutting like glass. "You thought you could erase me, replace me. But the truth is I was never dependent on you. Not on your approval, not your money, not your empire. While you were busy crowning Mark, I was building something greater than anything you could ever control." Mark's face flushed red, torn between rage and panic. My father sat frozen, unraveling in front of the very men whose respect he had spent his life hoarding. I rose, smoothing my jacket. "Thank you," I said softly, "for the closure." They said nothing as I walked out. And for the first time in my life I felt untouchable. The day of the final court session dawned bright and crisp, the kind of morning that feels like a blank page. I dressed simply, nothing ostentatious. Let them keep believing I was ordinary, diminished, harmless. One last illusion for them to cling to. Helen, my lawyer, met me at the courthouse steps, folder in hand. Calm, professional. "This won't take long," she assured me. Inside, the benches were sparsely filled. My father sat stiff, Mark beside him, both avoiding my gaze. Their attorney leaned in, whispering like the outcome was already his. The judge began reviewing the agreements. I signed each page without a word, offering no objections, no requests for revision. To everyone else it looked like defeat. To me it was release. My father leaned back, smugness radiating off him. I knew the thought running through his mind, she finally gave up. He proved me right. But when the gavel fell, something inside me lifted. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about being free. Outside, sunlight spilled across the marble steps. Helen handed me the folder, squeezed my arm gently. "It's done," she said. "Every tie severed. You owe them nothing." I thanked her, lingering a moment to feel the breeze. For years his voice had been the loudest thing in my head, drilling in the belief that I was never enough. And now, for the first time, it was silent. My phone buzzed. A notification. I opened it and the numbers glowed on the screen. 99 million. Trust transfer complete. A quiet laugh escaped me, soft but triumphant. Perfect timing. That evening I moved into a modest apartment on the city's east side. White walls, a single couch, a small table. No luxury, no show. I wanted people to believe I had been left with nothing. Let them whisper, let them underestimate me. It was safer that way. Dana called, as she often did, her tone bubbling with curiosity. "So, it's official. You're free." "Yes," I said, smiling at the city lights beyond the window. "Completely free." She laughed. "And wealthier than half the city combined. You're the only person I know who would call that freedom." "Because it is," I told her. "It's the freedom to choose. To live quietly if I want. To start something new on my own terms." I thought of my father then, his face paling when he realized the truth. The man who once labeled me useless now knew I had created something untouchable. That knowledge alone was worth more than any apology he'd never give. I brewed tea and sat by the window as the city hummed beneath me. For the first time in years I wasn't defending, proving, or planning. I was simply existing. And as the night stretched on, I whispered the truth I had earned, a truth no one could take from me. I'm not useless. I never was. And I never will be.